Hello, everyone. We are the epistemologers, and today's topic is the Constraint Cycle, which is a theory Aza has been playing with for a little bit. And so I know very little about it. He's been toying with it, so he's going to walk me through it. And this is kind of going to be kind of an intro. So, why don't you
Yeah,
tell me about the 4 steps of the Constraint Cycle?
sure. Um, so the constraint cycle is a theory that I have found myself using in my job and hobby as a software engineer. Um, the Basically, I'm just describing what I've been doing as well as I can, and it has epistemological or epistemic implications. So I figured we'd cover it here. And the interesting thing about it is it works on the principle of how people can explain everything that could be explained. They can also simulate anything that could be simulated. So if you can build a game or a virtual reality world that basically simulates some aspect of any world, even our world. This is more a sign of that principle. We have cases of being able to emulate a totally different system on a, or I should say, we can emulate one system on a totally different system, which shows the universality of simulation, emulation. But because engineers can build these things, that must mean that they were able to develop explanations for how to build these things. So for all of these things we can simulate or emulate, we can also explain them. And that shows a parallel in the logic between explanation and simulation and its universality. So that is really cool because if we are able to take a explanation about how to build something, we can actually go through the steps of constraining that idea down to the point where we're pretty sure it'll work, and then actually build the thing, and whether we were actually able to build it, that will tell us, that will constrain it even more.
So the saying "the proof of the pudding is in the eating of it" is saying that when you've built something or you've made something or you're able to do, because you're able to do something, is constraint for that thing being a reality.
Yeah. So there's a difference between a bridge that's standing and a bridge that is not functioning, falling down.
Right.
Right? There's a difference between being able to build something and not being able to build something objectively.
Right.
And you can describe why it's not working and so on in the same way that you can describe why any idea doesn't work. It's because you're looking for contradictions between ideas. And that's what we call problem. So all problems are contradictions between ideas, and those steps that you asked about,
Yeah.
there are 4 of them. They're basically just different kinds of problems that you're looking for. So in an effort to help people with the idea that we should be constraining our guesswork rather than
Supporting.
justifying or supporting or basing them off of anything, I'm offering this constraint cycle theory. So those 4 phases in the constraint cycle are roughly to do with logic. It's the first one.
Yep.
Second is science. Third is engineering. And fourth is art. So in each case, you're looking for problems in those particular realms. So with logic, you're looking for just generic contradictions between ideas.
Is this
Passes
idea
that stage,
valid, is this idea
logically sound?
sound? Okay.
Or coherent? Is it coherent?
You're asking if this idea
Yeah.
is coherent. I like coherent is probably a
Right.
good term.
Yeah. And well, the constraint cycle acts as an obstacle course
Right.
for ideas.
Right.
So you're putting ideas in, and you don't need to trust them, believe them, or reject them, or accept them, or anything. You don't need to have any position relative to them. You just pump it through this grinder called the constraint cycle, and if it survives it, it's a pretty good idea. So the first stage of the grinder is logic. Is this coherent?
Right.
You're looking for contradictions between ideas, just general problems. In science, the next stage, it's where you're actually starting to move objects around to build experiments.
Can this idea work? Can I build a prototype of this idea? Sort of thing.
Yeah. It's unpacking the mysteries of the idea, the stuff that you weren't able to get to in just logic. You're identifying the mysteries, the gaps, and you're probing the universe to find the answers to it. So with science, you're looking for contradictions between what is expected and what is actual.
Right.
All the time. That's all science does. It runs tests to find contradictions between expected and actual.
That's funny. That reminds me a little bit of the argument against socialism or Marxism, and how it doesn't work. So it's a nice idea on paper, but it doesn't work, is what is said about it. And so that would be it failed at the science step. People tried it, really didn't work out that well. And
well, remember though that science is informative only.
Right.
It's messing up the world to build experiments for informative purposes only.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm drawing the line in this particular theory.
In this model.
Yeah. But if it passes that step, we go on to engineering. And that's where you're actually rebuilding the world. You're actually expecting the thing that you build to improve the world in some way. And engineering is about finding logical contradictions between what we expected to build and what we actually built. So do you see how this is getting more specific?
Right. So
with the kinds of contradictions?
So science is like we've built a prototype. Once it's gotten past the science phase, you have a prototype. But in order for that idea to have wings or whatever to be a really good idea, it needs to get to the mass market stage. So in development, you would have like, oh, I got this one thing to kind of work, but I need to test it. I need to, have a production server for it. I can't just be a little script that I run on my computer. I have to run it at a larger scale on a server, right? That's a whole bunch of other steps.
Yep. And the final stage is the art stage. If it passes engineering, you can put polish on it by checking for an additional type of logical contradiction. It's the contradiction between what impressions we wanted to build, what did we want to feel, versus what we actually were able to get ourselves to feel from experiencing what we built. Does that make sense? So art is a subset of what's buildable. You're always building something.
Right. But art would be does it look nice at the end of it, or does it sound nice at the end of it? It's
got to give you the right impression. So if you're looking for a specific kind of impression, if you want to invoke some sort of feeling you want to check that with what you were actually able to build.
Right.
Art is basically just that final stage where you're trying to get that expressed. Okay. And that impression that people get from what you built is actually a really good seed for the next cycle, because you always start the constraint cycle by getting an impression of what you think is the case, what is a good idea. You get this impression off of what you've experienced, and that's all of the from everything you were able to absorb, and you just pump that thing right through the constraint cycle again. And you're building knowledge in this way because you're progressively and iteratively constraining down and trying to pin down your ideas and brutally rule them out if necessary.
Right.
To weed out the bad ideas. And this is why going into the future, I'm guessing this particular strategy could yield something like a golden age.
Right. Because
that's where
it daisy chains
engineers
off of each
really
other.
have the power. Yeah.
There would still be cause for... Are you saying that engineers should also then be artists in a way? Or do you think
it is an optional layer of constraint on the top of it? Anytime you're building something, there is always an aesthetic angle to it.
Well, I don't know if it's optional, because as you say, anytime you're building something, there's always an additional.
Optional is maybe a bad term.
It will always have an aesthetic
layer. Look, all of this stuff, each of the stages in the constraint cycle are optional. In a sense, like no one's gonna hold a gun up to you necessarily
and make you follow
to actually do all of this stuff. Yeah.
Well,
so this is a guideline for how to constrain. You're gonna want.
It's
to
a
do
rule
that.
of thumb, right? It's a maybe not.
It's a description of a physical process more than anything.
Sure.
It's just a description of a process that's possible, and you can do it if you want. And I think people generally want.
Oh no!
To do this sort of thing.
Well, I'm just asking. I guess the intent of my question was: do you think that teams or that an individual should do this, or do you think that it is better as a team in which people can focus on one or two parts of that equation, right? Because we see this specialization is something that happens a lot. So you could describe this in terms of like the physical engineering realm is pretty obvious. You have the first logic step is like theoretical physics, and then you have physics, which is the science step, and then you have engineering, which is the engineering step. And then you have sort of design and sort of the making it look good for marketing. The experience, which is the design step. And each inside of those, you can have that same process happen again. Although in manufacturing, it's a little bit less often that you do. In software, it's actually fairly common that from essentially initial concept to the end, you have a couple people working on that. Whereas in physical, you have whole teams that are devoted to one section. And so I guess maybe I've answered my question already, for you, but
you can just let the idea go. You don't need to have it be
distinct,
necessarily constrained. You can always just take your first intuition and just go with it.
Right.
If you want it. And a lot of people do that kind of thing because they just go with what they feel like.
Oh, yes.
But the best ideas for this constraint cycle are the ideas that can make it all the way. They're basically explanations of how to build something. Are the best, most falsifiable, I should say, ideas that you pass through. the most falsifiable ideas are ones about
that you can build, or you can
what you can build.
yeah
Yeah, what kind of world we want, and how to get us there, and stuff like this.
which is super. I think it's super good, because you get into a bunch of ideas like about God or about metaphysics, and while those can all be very good, I don't know if questioning whether or not God exists or questioning these sorts of things actually help humanity. I mean,
Yeah, it's debatable.
It's debatable because maybe on some level there's some good in knowing where you are, but I think that if you're more concerned with how to do rather than where you are, where you are, it can always be answered individually. How to do must be answered collectively, right? It has more benefit to the collective, whereas where you are,
the team aspect is the most powerful part of it,
right?
Because ideas can come from all of us.
Yeah.
The wider that net is cast, the
more powerful,
more ideas we have to work with.
And the more ideas we have to work with, the more sort of things we can generate, the more sort of things that we know are, the more things we know how to build. Even if they're, and the beautiful part is, I think humans are pretty good at separating the wheat from the chaff in terms of ideas. So you can have as many ideas as you want, and I think there's good filters on figuring out what building ideas, meaning, and that's kind of the whole point of the constraint cycle. At the end, if an idea isn't aesthetically pleasing, or if it doesn't work as well as it should, then maybe it wasn't that good of an idea, and maybe there's another idea that accomplishes that better.
Yep, exactly. And I think that's a good point to end on.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are the epistemologers. Please leave some comments. Like the video if you care to, or whatever. Subscribe to our channel. And I guess we'll see you next time.